the Gemara now, Daf Tzadik, hey, on Mid Aleph, we are learning how do we know that by a shoyl, I know a shoyl is liable for theft and loss, and we said that we know that even though the Torah doesn't say you are, it could be learned from Shomer Sachar, that even though Shomer Sachar sometimes ends up paying double, and the shoyl never pays double, but paying principal every single time is stricter. Because even in the case of a listed Mizuyin, an armed bandit, if a Shemer Zacha would say it was armed bandits, he would be exempt. Turned out to be that he was the god of himself. He pays double, but that's rare. Or furthermore, we can say that an armed bandit is merely a gazlan, and a gazlan is not paying double. So we're up to the Gemara now where it says Ashkechan. What is it? Sorry. About 15 lines to the top of the page. The first line, Mizuyin. So now we know that a shoyl is liable for theft and loss. How do you know that a shoyl is exempt if the owner happens to be working for him? The Torah says that if the owner is working for him and the animal dies by accident, the shoyl is potter because you're not considered a shomer. But how do you know that when it comes to theft and loss, the same exemption exists as well? You tell me, we'll equate it to a mesa. If it dies by accident and the owner works for your potter, same here. I can tell you no, a shvura mesa there, it's an accident. And because an accident, we are lenient. We'll say, look, the whole thing was an accident anyway. Bad enough that we're going to charge a show, but if the owner's working for him, okay, we'll let him get off scot-free. But when it comes to theft and avodah, well, you could have been you're a bit liable, you should have been more careful. Maybe in that case, if the owner's working for you, it's not enough of an exemption. So what if he's working for you? So how do we know? We learn from Shomer Sachar. Since by Shomer Sachar, if the owner is working for the Shomer Sachar and was stolen or lost, he's exempt. Same thing applies to shoyl. Now the question is, how do you know about Shomer Sachar? How do you know Shomer Sachar doesn't mention anything in the Torah about imbailav if the owner is working for you, only by shoyl. We learn. So here it's a roundabout, it's a round robin. So we learn the Shomer Sachar from shoyl. And we'll see in a minute how. That Shomer Sachar, therefore, you don't have to pay if the owner is working for you. And then we learn shoyl from Shomer Sachar that when it comes to Gneva Vaveda, which these are the obligations of Shomer Sachar, and an owner is working for him, they're exempt. Same thing applies to shoyl. How does that work? Just like a shoyl, the owners is working. It's potter. Same thing over here. The owner is working for him potter. But my gomer. So how exactly are you learning? Bava Metzia, we're just equating it. What do we find over there that whatever they're liable in the owners there is exempt? Over here also, whatever you're liable for, if the owner is working for you, you're exempt. I can ask the same question. Like I asked a minute ago. Maybe by a shoyl, the Torah made a special exemption if the owner is working for you, because as it is, an accident is not your fault at all. So the Torah had pity on you. How do you know when it comes to a case where there's partial liability here, especially lost, but even stolen, you could have been more careful maybe, that the Torah exempts if the owner is working for you? How do you know? Just because it applies there, who said it applies there? There's no logic behind it. It's a vav and that conjunctive and the shoyl follows the Shomer Sachar and says and, which as if to say that whatever applies to Shomer Sachar applies to shoyl and vice versa. Vav moisev al in addition. That what vav comes to add is a continuation. The yilmod elmod metachten. So we learned the pasuk is written before from the pasuk written after. It says the pasuk written after. That means this continuation. The Torah introduces this exemption of an owner working for you. We're going to apply that exemption also in the pasuk before the Shomer Sachar. When it comes to Gneva Vaveda, the Shomer Sachar is potter. And once we've established by Gneva, by Shomer Sachar is potter, the owner works, we go back to shoyl and say the same applies to shoyl. Bakati Gemara shoyl mishem Sachar legamar. So how do you know a shoyl? How can you learn? Okay, fine, you've established Shomer Sachar, but why are you comparing the shoyl to Shomer Sachar? I can ask, Shomer Sachar, she came potter b'shvur mesa. I can argue. You know why? But each one has a reason. You know why a shoyl is potter from the owner's working for him? Because we have pity on you. It's an accident. You know why by a soichet, by Shomer Sachar, if the owner's working for you, your potter is because you're since the Torah says you are potter from accident, which means that we generally treat you lighter. So therefore, we're also going to introduce this idea of owner. But when it comes to a shoyl that we are strict with, and it was partially his fault, who says we give him that apply that exemption? Is stricter. Ella Gneva Vaveda b'shoyl chiyuvim enolan. So how do you know that by a Gneva? So I'll tell you how we know. How do we know that you have to pay for theft and loss by shoyl? It's not written in the Torah. So we said before, we learn a kal v'chaymer from Shomer Sachar. A Shomer Sachar is exempt from accidents. Yes, pay is liable for theft and loss. So surely a shoyl who's chai for accidents is chai for theft and loss. And we have a rule when it comes to Kal V'chomer, you cannot be stricter with what you're learning, what you're gleaning from where you're gleaning it from. So this is the fact of the matter is, by Shema Sachar, if it was stolen or lost, if the owner was working for him, he is potter. And now by Shoyel, how do we know Yechayev for theft and loss? From Shema Sachar. So you cannot be stricter than Shema Sachar. So if the owner is working for the Shoyel at the time when it was lost or stolen, the Shoyel is potter, because Daya Lov Nadivli is Kinnatin. So now, if you remember, Tarfon doesn't agree with it. Where the Kal V'chomer is still active, we can learn other things from there. We don't apply the rule. When does Tarfon Maida you apply the rule Daya? When if you say Daya, there's no point in the Kal V'chomer. So then he says he agrees that you say Daya, but otherwise he says if he says you don't say Daya in a case where the Kal V'chomer is still active. If there's still a Kal V'chomer involved, if we can still use the Kal V'chomer or something, he says, you don't say Daya. Over here, we use the Kal V'chomer, teach you the general rule that a Geneva Vaved is Chai by Shayel. So Abtarman says, well, I have a Kal V'chomer, so why apply Daya at all? So he says here, Ma Geneva Vaved the Shema Sacha by Potter. Since by Shema Sacha is Potter, I've Geneva Vishom Shonan by Potter. He said Daya. Elamanda Leslie Daya, Michael member, which is Abtarman. According to him, he doesn't believe in Daya. So now that we, as we apply now to Shayel, and by Shayel said, now that we've established Yechayev Geneva Vaved, okay, but let's say Yechayev, even though it's working for you. How do you otherwise? Ela Amakra. It says in the pasuk Vechi Yishal, and we'll learn both ways. The Vav means that it's a continuation. Yishal Vav Moisev Al Yishal. The Vav says it's a continuation, and we're going to learn both ways. The Yilmoid Elyon Betachten Vetachten Me'elyon. We're going to learn the pasuk before from the pasuk afterward. That's how you know, but generally by Shema Sachar, he's potter if the owner's working for him, because we're learning it from the pasuk after, and we learn the pasuk after the pasuk before. So notice, once you've established by Shema Sachar, if the owner is working for him, he's potter, right? Because you're learning the Elyon from the Tach. Now you learn Tach from the Elyon. So now we're going to say the same thing applies to Shoyel. Why? Not Kal V'chomer or anything else. Not because of Daya, because the Vav tells you it's a continuation. Whatever the rules are here, the same rules apply here. Okay. That finishes this whole subject. Now we ask a very interesting question. Itma, we ask a question. Shia b'bailim. We learned that if the bailim are working, so whatever the chiyuvim are, by a Shema Sachar Gnei Baveda, the bailim, the original owner is working for you, you're potter. By a shoyel, if the owner is working for you, you're potter even for minus. What about a Shema Chinam? Was Pesheya, he's chayiv. He was negligent, left the gate open, the animal walked out, he's chayiv. What happened? The owner's working for him. Is it potter not? One guy says Chai, one guy says Potter. One guy says that Pshia also you are Potter. And the same thing as Shem B'Sachar, the Pshia, everyone is Potter. Man, the Chai, someone hold, one says Chai hold, Mikra, Nidr, Shlefana, Lifne Fana. In other words, where do you learn that the concept of Bailim? Only from Shoyel. So you go back one pasuk to the pasuk of Shem B'Sachar. You don't go back two psukim to the first pasuk, which is Shem B'Chinam. So Shem B'Chinam, no such exemption as Bailim Imay. Therefore, in Bailim Imay, Shem B'Chinam, like it. We don't have Bailim Imay relating back to Shem Chinam. However, so now that we know that by a Shem Chinam Pshia, the fact that the owner's working doesn't help. So now because we don't go back to psukim. Yes, so three psukim Chinam. So doesn't say anywhere in the pasuk by Lemimah. Where does it say in the third Shoyel? We only go back one pasuk. We don't take a din and go back two psukim. So therefore, that clause, that exemption of im bailav imay cannot be brought forward to the first pasuk, which is Shem Chinam. You have three psukim of Shem Chinam, Shem Sachar, Shoyel. We'll take that din of im bailav imay and bring it to Shem, because of the im and we'll bring it to Shem Sachar. There's no and of there between Shem Chinam. Don't say anything, so we can use it exactly for the chiyuvim of Shem Sachar. Then in the first pasuk, it talks about Shem Chinam, and there the only time is pasuk according to Rashi from a pasuk Ashaloi Pasha. The only time he's chayiv is Akol Pesha, that he's chayiv if he was Pesheya, and there's no exemption of Bailav Imay written anywhere in the pasuk Shem Chinam, so he's chayiv. Once we've established that a Shem Chinam is chayiv by Pshia, even the Bailav Imay, then we take Pshia and we move it to Shem Sachar and to Shoyel. Nowhere does the Torah talk about Pshia by a Shem Sachar. Nowhere does the Torah talk about Pshia. It's only a Kal V'chomer. If Shem Chinam, who's part of everything, is Chayiv Pshia, shows anything else. And since by Shem Chinam, if Bailav Ima is not an exemption, neither is a Bailav Ima exemption by Pshia, by Shem Sachar, or by Shoyel. You're still Chayiv by Pshia. And Pshia Nami b'Shem Sachar v'Shoyel like Siv. Hilcha b'Shem Sachar v'Shoyel l'chiyuv aser b'Kal V'chomer Shem Chinam. You learn how Shem Chinam. Avo bebailim liftoi af b'shem esacher b'shoyloi. My time of why? That tour of Bailavim is only on those chiyuvim which are written clearly by Shoyel and B'Shem Esachar. Then we learn the two from each other. Okay, that's one holds chayiv. The one holds potter. Man on potter sover mikra nidish lefanav v'lifnei fanav. Yes, you can take it since it's all the same subject. You can take it back to psukim earlier. Bring it to Shem Echinim. V'chi ksiv when the Taylor writes im Bailavimoy Hashem Echinim namiksiv. Include now, the Rambam says in Hilchos Chiras, Perek Beis, the Rambam says that even though we learned before in Baba Kama, we learned earlier as well that a shema does not swear on avodim v'karkois with all the works. The klal prat, the klal has to be similar to the prat. So something like karka, shtar, and avodim, you don't swear. And a shema is not therefore doesn't pay. If it's a shema b'sacher and the eved was stolen, he doesn't pay for it. If it's lost, he doesn't pay for it. So the Rambam says, but if you're a Pesheya, you do pay. Why? Because Pesheya is a mazik. In other words, Pesheya is different than all the other laws of Shema. It's not a Shema. You're a mazik. You're a mazik. That's what the Rambam says. So L'chayda, how do you understand the Gemara here? It says Pesheya bebailim is one opinion. You're potter. What do you mean you're potter? It's not, you're not a Shema. So in fact, someone that is Shema want to learn that this is exactly the machlekes here in the Gemara, whether pshia bebailim is part of chayiv is, they want to understand what's pshia. If pshia is a din and shmira, okay. If pshia is a din and shmira, then bailim your potter. If you hold that pshia is not a din and shmira, that it's a mazik, then who cares the bailim are there? What's that have to do with that? It's a din and mazik. No, the bailim doesn't have to be there. The bailim is working for you. It can be somewhere else. Or it's no longer working for you. And therefore, so that's how the Ritva and other Hashem want to learn. That's the machlekes here. There's a fascinating machlekes, but the point is, even the Rambam, if you think about it, even the Rambam says pshia b'baylim, that if you're leaving the door open, an ordinary person would not be chayiv, only if you're a shomer. An ordinary person went, you're only a grumma ben a zikin, and you potted, and you're looking at kindness there. But if what do you call it? If you're goyim, you're potter. But here we're going to hold you responsible, even if you're a goyim, because it's more than just a goyim. Because the owner is not walks away thinking, I don't have to worry about my animal at all because you're there. So you're worse than an ordinary person that comes and does something acting negligent, because the owner is still the owner and he should also be taking care of his animal. So you're a goyim, a goyim is potter. But if you're the shamer, even though if you're going to say I'm a mazik, so I wasn't really the shamer, but because the owner thinks that I am. So therefore, you have more responsibility. But it's just din mazik. What happens if the shayma then, instead of being a pesheya, actually physically damaged the animal? Do we say shmira b'baylam is potter? How far do we take this? So there's a fascinating machlekes Rambam the Rebbe. I just have in front of me. So the Rambam says that if a wife breaks dishes at home, she doesn't have to pay. Why? Because the shalom bayis. If she doesn't have to pay from her estate, whatever it is, that she'll walk on eggshells all the time, won't want to touch anything but dishes, and it's a disaster. The Ravid says, Loimen Hashem. That's not right. The Ravid says, it's Pshia B'Bailim. It's Pshia B'Bailim. In other words, she's a Mazik B'Yadayim here. She breaks the dishes. Not that she left the door open. She broke the dishes, B'Yadayim. And yet the Ravid says that, what is it? Why is it Pshia B'Bailim? So the Ravid says, because the husband is always indebted to work for the wife. He has obligations to work for the wife. So therefore, he's a schira b'baylim. So she's put for that reason. The Magen Mishnah defends the Rambam, fascinating. And not that the Rambam disagrees with the principle. The Magen Mishnah says, go work this one out. He says a wife is 24/7 working for the husband. A husband is only when he's working, then he's working for his wife. But when he's not working, he has no obligation to his wife. So therefore, when she's breaking the dishes, if he's not doing at the time something for his wife, he's not schir b'baylim. Whatever that means. That's what the Magen Mishnah says. Yeah, so the chayda, but the Pashut Pshat the Rambam is, no, let's say he's not working at work, he's sitting and learning, or whatever, he's eating. So the Rambam learned, so the Ravid learned that a mazik b'yadayim seems to be still pshir b'baylim, and the Rambam doesn't hold that. But which is very difficult to understand the right. So what we can also, they want to go a bit further. Mishnah Melech wants to go further because the Rav contradicts himself. because the Ravid agrees with the Rambam about being a mazik. The Ravid was trying to say there's two kinds of maziks. Even be a dime, but two kinds of maziks. Unintentional and intentional. In this case here of the wife, well, nobody's saying that she's intentionally throwing dishes around. They're not talking about an Italian family. They're not throwing dishes around. They are just, what do you call it? It fell, and she's worried. So that's the Ravid says, that kind of a pshia, we say pshia by potter. But when you're physically intentionally breaking dishes, it's a whole different story. Then you're a mazik, no different than anybody else. And the Bailim doesn't come into the picture, doesn't come into the question. Anyway, I didn't mean anything about that right at the time. Family, then it's just an old adage. Yeah. If he's working in something, it could even be something else.
That takes her away from the shoyal or whatever.
That's the whole word. The word is that when there's a pure bailim, you're no longer shayim. What's the logic behind that? You're sitting in a barber shop and the guy is cutting your hair. You say, "By the way, can I borrow your car?" Yeah, but it's totally unrelated. Anyway, but you're right. That's what it is. But it's exactly there's a concept. Well, let's continue Gemara. So we're now going to ask a few questions. It's Gemara. Now we learned. Hashoyel as a potter. It's not mission. If you borrow a potter, v'shol ba'alima, you borrow the ba'alim with it. Hashoyel as a potter, v'socha ba'alima, you hire the ba'alim with it. Shol ba'alel yisocha b'achna shol potter. First you hired the owner or borrowed him, and then you borrow the potter of the mesa potter. The ilu shoy mechinim like Tani doesn't mention the obligation of a shoy mechinim. The Mishnah should give another example. A shoy mechinim was a pesheya. Well, the time it says umeisa, whatever. The time meich Shem Yisach Miktani doesn't mention example Shem Yisach over. It just says umeisa. We're talking about a shayl. Elatani Milsa the Ksiva behed Yiktani. Where does it say the din of Ba'al Avimah? Clearly, only by shayl. Even though we're learning Shem Yisach from shayl, but that's only through the vav, the extra vav. It's not mefurish. So that which is written mefurish, Tani, the Mishnah mentions. The Asim Midrash is like Tani. The Drashi doesn't mention, even though sometimes we say just the opposite. At in the beginning of the Dur, another place we learn that Yavamis, the Daf can mention things which is a drasha, but that's because that's if he mentions everything. The question is, what's the order? Here, he's only mentioning one thing. Then he'll say what's unfortunate. So no value one way or another. He doesn't mention Mechidim, knows he mentions Shem Yisach. Tashma coming here, it says in a Braisa, Sha'ala, B'Shal Ba'alima, you borrowed her and you borrowed the owner as well. Sachra B'Shal Ba'alima, same thing. Ushala B'Shal Ba'alima, Sachra B'Shal Ba'alima. Either you rented, you hired, and you borrowed. The owner is working elsewhere. The mason animal died. Potter. The evening you potter. So you can't say, "Oh, the owner should take care of the animals." I mean, here he's working for you on another property altogether. So we thought, Hamani, Rabbi Yehuda Hidamar, we thought this is Rabbi Yehuda who says that Seichet Kishem Mesachadami, that a Seichet has the same din as a Shem Mesachad. The Torah doesn't say Seichet. Remember, we had an argument of Seichet like a Shem Mechinim or like a Shem Mesachad. So let's assume a Seichet like a Shem Mesachad. It only talks about Shem Mesachad here, and it doesn't talk about a Shem Mechinim. But Haitani Tani Milsa, that's with Russia. So he talks about Shem Mesachad here. And doesn't mention you should get another example. If you're a Pesheya and the owner is working for you, you're potter. Maybe Hamani the mayor, the Rabbi says that Soichet Keshem Mechinim. Maybe it follows a mayor who says that a Soichet Keshem Mechinim, and yes, Shem Mechinim is included. With Tana Shem Mechinim, what is Shem Mesacher? Then you'll ask me why doesn't it say Shem Mesacher? The fact that he mentions Shem Mechinim, which is even less mefurish. I think they have a but less mefurish. So therefore, and it's only Lifnei Fana, which is a bigger chiddush. We already know Shem Yisach as well. Or like we had a few days ago, the Tani, he learns exactly the opposite. That May is the one that says Shem Yisach. Now, if you say Shem Yisach, and therefore you want to follow Rabbi Yehuda, that's Rabbi Yehuda. Taisa wants to know, why do we want to learn as like Rabbi Yehuda? Usually we say we like to learn like Meir, because Stambish is a Meir, and so on and so forth. Here, we're happy because of Shem Yisach is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Now we learn like Rabbi Yehuda. This makes the question. So, why are you pushing to learn like Rabbi Yehuda? The author of Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says two dinim which we're not going to follow. Firstly, he says, when do we say that the bailim are there? You're potted. Only the bailim is there working with the animal. And either the bailim has to work with the same work. I want to plow, and I'm using the bailim to help me plow with this animal. Or I have a what do you call it? I want to use a donkey to transport freight, and the porter will be the owner of the animal. Another point he says here that even when it died, the guy still has to be working for you. Alma kasava bail of ima fully milsa mashal has to be the entire pasuk, beginning to from the time you borrowed to the time that the accident actually occurred. Two didn't. Masiv Rabba from the Bryce you just learned, he asked, Shalom, Vishal Bailima, Sachar, Vishal Bailima, Sachar, Vishal Bailima, Shalom, Vishal Bailima, Afa Pisha Bailima, Malach Machmachar, said clearly, even though the owner is working elsewhere, but makes it die potter. You're telling me, Ravanuna, that the owner has to be working with this animal on this very job, and there it says Machmachar, different place. My lab and Malacha Chedes, another work. Say, well, I know, but Oisa Malacha. He's doing the same job that you took the animal for. What do you mean mokamacha, different place? You said he's working out with that. The kamar piva azul kama. He is working, but he's in front of the animal, softening up the ground, and the animal is right there behind him, continuing to the work. So that's what they mean mokamacha. He's not on top of the animal, but he's in front of them, but we're all working on the same job. Okay, the Sefer Al Gaba, the Sefer which says Al Gaba, which we'll see in a minute what that means, what the case there is. Is Reisha Melacha Cheres? Is the Reisha to something other words? What does it say in the Sefer? The Tony Sefer says in the Sefer, Shala, what happens if you borrow this animal? So first you borrow the animal, then the guy's working for you. Even though that guy is on top of the animal, working with the animal at the time when it died, but Mesa. Chayiv, because he didn't, for the time when you became a shomer, he was not tied to you at all. So by saying al gaba in the sefer, which means when the Reisha says that if you did hire him right first, then even though you're doing malacha achet, does not mean al gaba, means something else. Amri Reisha the sefer ba'is malacha. No, Moshe, no. They're both cases, according to Manuna, the guy has to do the same work. No boss. Reisha the Vusha Kamashal, Saber is Kamashal. Reisha the Vusha, the Chiddush Reisha is Afagab the Lab Al Gab, is not mamish on top of the animal. Ela ba'oisa malacha. But as long as he's doing the same work, keeping the Baruch Hashila Potter, the Sefer Vusha Kamashal, Sefer Chiddush, the Afagab, the Al Gaba, is mamish on top of it. But Kiva, the Lord have the chayiv. Says the Gemara, "Hi, my, what are you talking about?" If you take the Bryce literally, that the Reish is talking about since you hired him first, and now he's doing another job altogether. The Sefer, and the Sefer since you hired him afterwards, and the Chiddush is that even though his mom is doing the same work with the animal, okay, I can see the Chiddush in each one. If you tell me the Reish and the Sefer about talking about the same particular work. And what the Reisha is talking about, he's standing in front and softening up the ground, and the Sefer is talking about that he's on top of it, he's pulling, he's standing there and he's pulling in the animal in the direction. That's like a guy, but what's the difference? You're both doing the same work. But that's not one. But Tanya, we look at another Brayse, it says, it says that if the owner is working for you, you don't have to pay. So why does it have to spell out? But the owner is not working for you, you do have to pay. Isn't that obvious? You can't automatically infer that if the owner is not worth you, you have to pay. What does it come and tell you? What does it come and tell you when he says the worker is not with you? Let me tell you. It starts off saying if the owner is with you. And the chiddush is that even though why does it have to say then the owner is not with you? Then you have to pay. It says follow. If, for example, the owner is with you at the time of borrowing, it does not have to be with you at the time of the accident. But if he was there at the time of the accident, not good enough. If the owner was, but if the owner was not with you at the beginning, you have to pay. So that's one price. The Tanya, we'll look another Bryce, the same question but from the second half. It says, the owner is not with you, pay. Don't I know she you don't have to pay. Let me tell you. As long as he worked for you in the beginning, even though at the end he's not working anymore, you are potter. Clearly here, from these two Bryces, that Each one learned from a different part, but the same idea that he doesn't have to be with you from the beginning to the end. How could Rav Nuna say you have to be with him from the beginning to the end? To Yufta, Rav Nuna, to Yufta. Completely repudiate of Rav Nuna said. Sai is first in, Sai is second in. Now the Gemara concludes, continue. Abaye is Savla Rabbi Yeshe. You remember, Rabbi Yeshe says you always learn the things together until the Torah clearly says that you should be separating. Umetaris l'krayek Rabbi Yeshe, and he learns these two brises because these two brises are saying the same thing, but each one is learning from a different part of the pasuk. For the part that the Bailam is or Yepater, the Bailam is not with Yechayiv. And he learns the two brises following Rabbi Yeshe, and Rabbi Savla Rabbi Yeshe. Rabbi Yava learns like Rabbi Yeshe that automatically we know that they're separate, and Umetaris l'krayek Rabbi Yeshe. And therefore, he'll answer according to Rabbi Yeshe. The argument Yeshe mentioned we had yesterday was if you curse your father, your mother, whether we would have thought it means them together until we said otherwise, or each individual. If the owner is not with him, shalom yishalom, then you have to pay. So because the pasuk says two things: when you borrow, and it says a mesa, and it died. So according to Yeshe, automatically we put the two together. It has to be at the time of borrowing, and it had to be there at the time of when he died. So how do we read the pasuk according to Yeshe? If the owner was not working for you by both, say when you borrowed and say when an action happened, but if he was there by one of them, either he was there when you borrowed the animal, he was already working for you, or even he wasn't. But when the animal died, he was working for you. Good enough, potter. That's what it would seem from that second pasuk. However, when it says im bailam im, but the other pasuk says if the owner's with you, lo yishal. If the owner's with you, again we read together. If the owner's with you for both, you don't have to pay. But if the owner's with you by one, you still have to pay. So one part of the pasuk teaches us that if you're only with one, you have to pay. The other part of the pasuk says if you're only with one, you're potter. How do we reconcile that? So we're going to say one of them, if he's with you, is enough to potter you, and the other one, if he's with you, is not enough to potter you. Why are you potter? Because he's working with you both. He's only working with you either the time of borrowing or the time of the accident. So how do we work that out? So this is how we learn. Let me tell you. If he was with you at the time of borrowing, then we don't care if he's working for you at the time of the accident. But if he's with you at the time of the accident, that's not good enough. That alone is not good enough. He had to be with you at the time of working. That's how Abaye learns. Rava will learn the same thing, but he learns like Rabbi Yeshe. Rabbi Yeshe learns automatically we say one is enough. So Rabbi learns and so the outcome is the same, but just learns pshat differently. The time we learned, it says in one pasuk, the owner is with you, and that pasuk mentions two things: borrowing and the accident. You don't have to pay. Sounds like one of them. I don't care which one. If it's with you, one of them, you are potter. Mashma the isa b'tavai, mashma nami also see the chiyisa b'chada, the lesser b'chada potter. Uksiven it says in the other pasuk, if the owner is not with you, it sounds like even by one of those things, if he's not with you, then you have to pay. Mashma the lesser b'tavai or brosa mashma nami also seems the chiyisa b'chad the lesser b'chad if he's with you with one and not with the other chayiv. What's going on here? I'm going to tell you. If it was this you when time of borrowing doesn't have to be time of breaking, the mesa or the accident or died. But if he's with you at the time when the accident happened, not good enough. So the has to be both. So how do you know? How do you know which one it is? Maybe he has to be at the time of accident. Doesn't even make more sense. The time of the accident is when he should be there. As you said, at the time of accident, maybe he can help out. Let's reverse it and say that if he was there at the time of borrowing, not good enough. It has to be at the time of the accident. No, mistabla makes sense. Shaila difa. The chiyuv kicks in when you borrow, and if the owner is there, as if you never became a shayman. That's when you bring it into the shus. Why do you have to pay money? Because of the accident. So that's the moment the chiyuv starts. Shura makes a difference. You get chayiv and seh. You're chayiv for the accident, so therefore the owner's working for you. At that time, you potter. Says the Gemara, if you wouldn't have borrowed it, Shura makes it, but you would potter anyway. So what's the chiyuv? The chiyuv is in the moment when you borrowed. My ovid. Then who cares if it died by accident? Would you be potter if you didn't become a shaman? Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? Relashur meisa shayla my ovid. So you became a borrower, but if an accident happened, there's no chiyuv. I feel hochik shayla difa. Why? Shekin chayiv b'mezonis. Because that's when you're chayiv b'mezonis. Big argument. When do you become responsible to feed the animal? For when you schlep the animal, When you do the Mashiach, the Kenyan, or as soon as the owner says, okay, I'm walking away, even before you made the Mashiach. But what's the point you're trying to say here? That's when the Chiyuvim kick in. We learned in Ksubas, the Flamadal, we had a big machlek, we spoke about it in Bava Metzia. Actually, later. Machlek is not chrenim. When does the shoyel? Two ways of understanding how a borrower is the pshat. As soon as you borrow an animal, you already chayiv. You have a chiv to the owner. But if it died, let's not a shoyel. Let's say shem esachah. But if it died by accident, or let's say a shoyel, it died based on machmalacha, so that's a ptur. That means that it says if I paid you back, or the pshat I have no chiv whatsoever until the accident happens. As long as the animal is alive, it's your animal. What do I owe you? It's your animal. When the animal dies, I'm chayiv. And that's a discussion in the Gemara. The Gemara back and forth. One opinion of the Gemara is that no, the chayiv kicks it straight away. Another chayiv says no, the chayiv starts only when it dies. And the Gemara concludes here, since the chayiv of mezainis starts straight away, that means all the chayiv starts straight away, including the chayiv that you owe the person for this animal. But as long as the animal is alive, you can pay back with the animal. If the animal is dead, then depends how it died, whether that's considered payback or not. Ravashi gives a different answer. It says if you borrow from your friend, as if to say, but not borrow your friend with the animal. That's when you pay. If you borrow your friend with the animal, in other words, he's working for you, it doesn't matter what job it is, potter, he's potter. So if it's so clear the pasuk, then why then the whole thing is redundant. My Bible, even lovely. Who needs this whole pupil? Just say the first part of the passage. It's clear that only. So Rashi is very simply. If not for those extra words, we wouldn't have learned that way. When it says Ki yishal ishma imreyu, hi urchenikrahu. That's the normal way of writing. Okay, we'll stop here. Tomorrow.